Franklin D. Roosevelt was the 32nd President of the United States and a member of the Democrat Party. He was born January 30th, 1882. Prior to being president, he had served as a New York State Senator from the 26th District. He was an Assistant Secretary of the Navy under President Wilson, and he was the 44th Governor of New York. In 1932, Roosevelt ran against the incumbent Republican Hoover. Roosevelt won soundly with 57.4% of the vote, with Hoover only taking 39.7% of the vote. During his initial term, Roosevelt passed the Emergency Banking Act, ended federal prohibition, established the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, and the Public Works Administration, passed the National Industrial Recovery Act, which contradicted antitrust laws, gave Executive Order 6102, which declared that all American gold was the property of the government, and forcing Americans who owned gold to sell it to the government. Cut down our military and cut veterans' benefits by 40%. 500,000 veterans and widows were denied their pensions. He passed the Social Security Act and passed the National Labor Relations Act. In 1936, Roosevelt ran against Republican Alf Landon in what could only be described as a landslide, having won 46 states, while Landon won only 2. During this term, having been upset with the resistance he got from the Supreme Court, Roosevelt passed the Judicial Procedures Reform Bill of 1937, which called for the adding of more justices to the court, allowing Roosevelt to stack the court in his favor. He signed the Housing Act of 1937, which created public housing agencies. He passed the Fair Labor Standards Act, passed the Reorganization Act of 1939, which increased the power of the president's office. He gave ships to Britain in an attempt to help them with World War II. In the 1940 election, Roosevelt ran against Republican Wendell Willkie. His victory, while impressive, was not as dominant as the one in 1936. Roosevelt won every state except for Maine, Vermont, Michigan, Indiana, Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and Colorado. During this term, the attack on Pearl Harbor led to war with Japan. While a letter from scientist Leo Szilard and Albert Einstein, warning of Germany's quest for nuclear weapons, led to a declaration of war against Germany, as well as the creation of the Manhattan Project, which was the U.S.'s own quest for a nuclear weapon. Through the course of the war, Roosevelt, on at least 2 occasions, sent troops to aid British forces despite having promised them to the Russians who were under siege. Roosevelt passed the Revenue Act of 1942, which hiked the U.S. tax rate to 94%. Leading up to the 1944 election, Roosevelt's policies shifted steadily closer and closer to outright socialism. In 1944, Roosevelt won his fourth election, this time against Republican Thomas E. Dewey, beating him with 432 electorals to his 99. This term lasted merely a month before his death. FDR is best known for being the only president to have 4 terms. Little known fact, after Pearl Harbor, he had all American citizens of Japanese descent rounded up and placed in concentration camps. His greatest accomplishment was the creation of the Fair Labor Standards. His biggest failure was using the American people's desperation to cripple Americans with socialist policies for generations to come. He was nicknamed FDR because they are his initials. He died April 12, 1945, at age 63 from a cerebral hemorrhage.